down Twitter. And in 2010, the iPad launches in the United States. But in India, mobile web traffic hits 1 billion requests per month, doubling every year, and Google leaves China. Now think about this. In 2024, the internet will stop being a child and start becoming an adult. It'll be 30 years old. How will it look? How will the technologies we use work? But most importantly, what will be the largest influences on the web? The message I want to give you today is that it's actually the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, rather than the United States and Europe, that will have the biggest role in shaping the future of the internet. I'm not going to talk about necessarily the technologies that we'll be using. I mean, who knows? But I can tell you about the cultural and consumer models. And the starting point for that is demographics. This is a very interesting map behind me, because what it shows you is a map skewed towards the population of the people that will be living in the future. And by 2030, a third of the population increase in the world will come from two countries, India and China. By 2050, when we have 9 billion people on the planet, over the vast majority of the population will live in these emerging countries. And of course, yes, it's about economic power. When you look at the top 7 economies of the world in 2008, the ones behind me now, and you add a few years forwards, you can see the dramatic change by 2026. China's overtaken the United States, India has overtaken Japan, Brazil's overtaken Germany, and Russia has been let into the club. It's not just money, of course. These are some photos I took in Norway when I was at Gulltaggen last year. And one of the fascinating things behind the shift in growth in the BRIC countries is the rise in the middle class. And no, it isn't because everyone has moved to Scandinavia. In fact, you can see here, China is now 40% almost of the world's middle class by 2030, and India about 6%. The other story here, besides money and power, of course, is the rise of the internet. And if you look since the birth of the web in the early 1990s, you can see the story of the rise of the BRIC countries, which are, even in this moment as we speak, moving ahead of the United States. So look at it now. It's quite beautiful the way it tracks. China moving ahead of Japan, Brazil moving ahead of Germany, and then just recently, the last couple of years, China moving way ahead. So that's just the last year. What happens now in another 20 years? And I believe the secret to that lies in this graph. You can see here, this is the absolute numbers of web users in the world. Now, what's intriguing about this is when you look at those BRIC countries, because regardless of how many people use the internet in those countries, look how low the penetration rates are. So China, with 360 million users, is still at only 26%. India, with 81 million users, is still only at 7% of its potential. So when you look at that, you realize that as the internet develops, there's going to be a massive shift in power. And it's that shift in power that I'm particularly interested about. Now, I know royalty at the moment is a very sensitive topic in Scandinavia. I mean, I learned on the weekend that it's actually not so bad for Norway, because the world discovered, as I did, that, well, actually, Norwegian girls are more preferable than Swedish princesses. But in a way as well, the question of power with the BRIC countries, I believe, comes down to what I call the 3 crowns. The first crown is economic power. There's no doubts about this. You saw in the facts I just gave you the rise of the purchasing power of those economies. But the second crown is more subtle. It's what I call age power. Because all of us in the West, unfortunately, and some more than others, are getting older. And by 2030, we will be positively senile. Whereas in the BRIC countries, they'll be young, they'll be dynamic, they'll have a higher proportion of their population in the workforce. And of course, the third crown is what I call soft power or cultural power. Because you can't have that many people on the internet with that many young people and economic power without actually having an influence over culture as well. So when you look at all those factors, it really leads you to one inescapable conclusion. When I look at the logo of Apple, I always think of the irony, because it reminds me of a graph. what is the missing chunk in the Apple logo? Well, it might be this, 14%. Do you know what that is? That is currently the percentage of Americans who constitute the global World Wide Web. This is the rest of the Apple, 86%. That's now. So it's very easy to read TechCrunch, and to read Twitter and all the blogs, and to imagine in the echo chamber that the world is completely driven by what I call web post etiquette. But the truth is very different. And how much longer can we really believe that the United States will continue to be the dominant force on the web? So to summarize this point, I believe that the most powerful future influence on the web will be the digital emergence of the BRIC nations, supported not just by economics, but by their relative strength in youth demographics and cultural influence.